Marco,
Sean, I disagree.
I disagree with you too, as we often do. We agree to disagree all the time.
That's why we make interesting conversation, I think.
Hopefully, at least for ourselves. Maybe a few other people enjoy them
Well,
too,
well,
but
we'll, we'll see if our guests agree with us or not.
I know. So this is a not a first for us with ITSP magazine, but certainly for my show Music Evolves. Typically, I have one-on-one conversations with artists and performers and creators and professors and the like. But today we're doing a panel to look at AI in music and who owns the rights to what, given that AI seems to be creating new things based on old things. And many of those old things are not in the public domain and created by somebody who owns the rights to them and probably an organization that owns the rights to them. So we're going to talk about how all this fits together. And of course, if it's just you and I, we had a conversation on this, which is
We did.
why
That's when
we,
we decided to have
I know
an
people who know
extended
what
conversation.
people who know what the heck's going on, not just us. So I'm thrilled to have Drew, Chandler, Michael, and Puya on to bring different perspectives. We'll do a quick round here. Of course, Marco, you'll jump in where you want. Quick round for who you are, what you're up to in this space of music, and then we'll ask the fun questions. Chandler, we'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Chandler Lawn. I'm currently in my last year of law school at the University of Texas. I was a professional musician, singer songwriter, touring, recording artist for over 10 years. I also taught music education for many years, and now I primarily focus my legal research and publications on legal issues involving copyright and AI targeted towards the music industry.
You have some research that you put together and a paper you put together, which we'll link to as well, so people can read that. Drew, a few words from you.
Sure. Just like Chandler, I started out as a professional touring and recording artist, signed to Atlantic, still have a rough trade publishing deal. Did A&R at two majors, Warner's, and then I was a senior vice president of A&R at Sony. Also ran Pandora's music team in between. I have since started my own company. I have a textbook that's coming out in February called Machine Music, How AI is Transforming Music's Next Act. I'm also an adjunct professor of music strategy, innovation, and AI at Berklee College of Music. I'll be teaching some other AI classes at some other universities, and I have a lot of clients and consultant work in this space.
Fantastic. Great to have you on. And Michael.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Sheldrick. I'm one of the co-founders of Global Citizen. We're mostly known in this space for how we use music to connect people and give citizens around the world a place to take action to end extreme poverty. And probably most well known in New York City for the Global Citizen Festival, have just gotten back from our first ever event in Latin America, which took place in Belém, the gateway to the Amazon, which was incredibly exciting. In addition to that, I also teach policy entrepreneurship at Columbia University and have recently published a book called From Ideas to Impact, a playbook for influencing and implementing change in a divided world. And I think probably what's most of interest to this conversation is how increasingly I've been looking at not just music as a way to advocate and engage people, but the way music itself can help drive job creation, economic development, and poverty alleviation if we get governments to understand its power and make sure as we race towards AI and this new technology era, we set things up, policy frameworks, intellectual property laws, all in the right way to really harness the full potential of music. It could be incredibly exciting. So thrilled to join you today.
Yeah, fantastic. Glad you could. Last but not least, a good friend of mine from LA there, Puya. How are you?
I'm good. Hi, I'm Puya Partow-Navid. I'm a partner at Sci-Fi Shah. My practice is, I've been practicing for 18 years. My practice is focused on patents mostly, but I also cover the wide range of IP. We've been doing AI patents for around 10 years now. And then once generative AI came about, I was kind of the subject matter expert at our firm, and we cover various IP issues. I don't have any musical background, but I secretly wish I could be a rock star. That would be my alternate
Don't we
ego.
all? Don't we all,
Yes.
Puya?
I think we all want to. I think we all want to, and I'll use that as kind of the entry point for the conversation to start, which is a lot of us. I don't know if it makes it easy to perform. Maybe it does, but AI certainly gives a lot of people a chance to create music, right? Marco and I, as part of our last conversation, we each took that conversation, wrote a prompt, and created a minute piece each with our own styles. And who knows where the source of that came from? And I didn't want to do it. Marco teased me into doing it, but dared me to do it. But I guess the point is, we can all create using AI now, which is cool. Um, I don't think it's right. Marco likes to do it, and then there's the middle reality of is it legal or not. So I want to put it out there because reusing ideas and feelings and emotions and words and notes and chords, it's been done for decades, right? Music builds on music, builds on music, builds on music. There are rules and rights and regulations and how have things changed now with AI? And Chandler, I'm gonna leave it to you to kind of kick things into gear of where you see things are today, looking back.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there is a lot of talk now about the democratization element, right? That these technologies bring to music. And I think having worked in music education, I can see the appeal, being able to teach a music class to kids and having them draft their own songs, or maybe creators who are less financially capable of recording in a big studio or hiring a band to track live on their songs, whatever those financial constraints may be. But like you mentioned, Sean, and I think I tend to kind of lean in your direction and fall into the camp of, is it legal? Is it okay to not compensate the artists who were responsible for feeding the data that built these models in the first place? Well, I think the tool and the technology are undeniably pretty revolutionary and provide a lot of new opportunities that do have value in and of themselves. I think we have to dig deeper and look at the root of how they were created in the first place, and whether not only are those foundations ethical, but are they sustainable long term?
And feel free to jump in, anybody, but I'll turn it to Drew. But if you have something to share, just jump on in.
Yeah, I think we have to clearly get an answer on whether training a model on protected IP is legal or not, because that'll just help define the ethical boundaries once we know the legal boundaries, and it'll help stir the market. I think it's important, though, to separate the narrative between what's real. I think the music industry is looking for this narrative that music that is created with generative AI is replacing artists or somehow a threat to the music industry. And the evidence is actually quite different. We now have 2+ years of generative AI streaming and flooding the DSPs. It is still less than 1% of the royalty pool. Fans don't want to listen to this. DSPs aren't supporting it. This tech is really cool. Like Chandler and Sean, you mentioned, it's got a lot of upside to the creation process and it's creating new markets. But I don't see a lot of evidence, and as MIDI has done some good research here too, that it's actually replacing artists. So I think one of the fights over copyright and fair use or not, one of the tenets, as I'm going to defer to Chandler, the legal scholar here, that it harms the commercial market for the original. And there's not a lot of evidence that it's doing that. In fact, there's some evidence that it's actually creating new markets for rights holders and artists. So I think we can take a step back, and whether we like it or not, it's here. And I think we just need to be very clear about what it means to have generative AI in our lives, because it's not necessarily what I think people think.
I think it's interesting because the whole discussion around this, if you look at the positive, by forcing this discussion to happen around music and IP, and Sean, you mentioned that in some respects, this is not new, right? If you go to certain parts of the world, we were just with the Prime Minister of Barbados a few weeks ago. You can also speak to ministers of culture across many African nations. they would talk about the fact that many of these countries have no shortage of incredible artists, right? But they all either have to get registered in a place like the UK, Ireland, or the US in terms of where they're licensed. And then, of course, the royalties go to those countries, and those countries like Barbados or countries in Africa are not able to tax any of those revenues and feed it back into their own economies. Or, many of those musicians don't license their music, and it gets picked up anyway in different places. And this has happened for years. And so, this conversation around strong copyright, strong intellectual property, and actually enforceability may actually be a good thing many of these countries where artists are, because when you look at the size of the music economy, it's only growing. The last 2 or 3 years, the fastest growing region in the world for downloads from streaming, albeit from a low base, has been sub-Saharan Africa, right? Now, where are most of the proceeds of the revenues for that going? Probably not staying in country. And so it is a massive opportunity to be sitting around the table with ministers of finance, with attorneys general, and actually saying, hey, with the right regime, there's so much possibility and potential. With the right laws, with the right frameworks, this could be a major driver of economic growth and revenue for you as a country. So in that sense, it's forcing a conversation, from Johannesburg in South Africa all the way to Bridgetown, Barbados, which I think is incredibly exciting that people are looking at this in a brand new way. So that's perhaps one of the upsides of this whole conversation right now.
Yeah, well, I agree, and that's when me and Sean take one side or another, I think sometimes it's forced. I think we share a lot of the same thoughts, and my podcast is about technology and society, so I like to even take the music conversation to art in general, right? Like writing, it's been a big part of the conversation. Newspaper wants to copyright the articles, and writers, of course, same thing. We may say the same thing about photography and anything else. But the truth is, as we've been mentioning, that we've always been inspired by what we already hear. Like even when you teach to a school like a kids to play, Chandler may agree, you're still playing other people's music. And it kind of gets ingrained in your brain. And sometimes I'm not a professional musician, but I play around with my piano and I'm like, hey, wait a minute, I just changed one note here, then I have another song. It's just one note out of 5, and it's another one, and I'm creating music that it's in my brain because I heard it so many times. The compensation, that's the key. So I love how Drew and Michael and Chandler too, we're kind of leaning towards the fact that having this conversation and having AI, it may be a good thing, as long as we figure it out how nobody should be, like nobody should be stealing other people. Like there are cases, and I'm going to mention one, like I've seen Oasis 3 times with my wife because she's crazy about them, and I kind of look at the Verve, listen to the Verve, and discover how the Bittersweet Symphony has been pretty much giving money to the Rolling Stones for the past how many years, and finally a few years ago they gave the right to him. So in a way, there could be an entire conversation and debate there as well. So maybe everybody could make money in a fair way. But I love that we're actually talking about this. So that's why we take a position or another. I don't think it's because we are on one side or the other. We're just passionate about the art.
We are, and I think quickly, I'm just really encouraged by artist community and rights holders who are managing this pretty well and talking and thinking about this. The relationship that the music industry has had with technology over the last 2 generations has been terrible, like terrible. Mm-hmm. I mean, could they have gotten file sharing any more wrong? Like, and even streaming, which they righted, streaming launched in Europe in 2005 and didn't come to America till 2010. I mean, these completely fumbled that. But as much as I talk to the big AI companies, and as much as I talk to the major labels and the artist communities and trade groups, I think everyone understands this is pretty dramatic. And I think everyone is, even though they might have some opposing viewpoints and different points that they want to get across, and they have some not always aligned interests and incentives. Everyone's managing this stuff and thinking about this stuff pretty seriously, which is different from the past. So I'm encouraged.
And Puya, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, because the one thing that sticks out for me with AI is just the sheer scale with which things can happen.
Yeah,
And that means creative, but also, kind of to touch on a few points we made, it's also identifying and being able to track back, perhaps, where things
that's a
are,
good
kind of
point.
Michael's point. So how are organizations and individuals you work with kind of getting their hands wrapped around it? Do they know enough about what's happening to actually put some lines in the sand that this is acceptable, this is not?
Well, there's a good case that recently, the George R. Martin case, because he brought a suit, and like 2 years ago, if you asked us, it was kind of the Wild West. You didn't know where it was going, and it seemed like the courts were leaning towards the AI, the models, who owned the models. But George R. Martin, the writer of Game of Thrones, brought a suit, and the court allowed it to proceed because there was a direct tie between his material and what the generative AI outputted. So they could say you could, as a causal link. I think one of the issues is, and this goes back to copyright cases, is, for example, Two Live Crew sampled Pretty Woman, and that was transformative enough that, and I have a fire alarm going, so I don't know what's going to happen, but that was transformative enough that that wasn't a copyright violation. But for example, Vanilla Ice sampling Under Pressure, that was not transformative enough. So I think one of the issues here is, can you have a link between the material that it was trained on and what the output is? And I don't know what's going to happen there in the courts. That might be that seems to be the fundamental issue. But then that's only the U.S. When we get globally, like, if is the court, if someone's training material songs in China, are they going to be held accountable under the same standards that the U.S. companies are? And we got to imagine that's not. We don't have to imagine. It's the reality is, it's a global system. So we have to figure out globally, because what happens in the U.S. isn't going to be enforced in China, isn't going to be enforced in Europe. So that's the bigger issue, I think, is having a global system in place where artists are respected and their rights are enforced.
Can
I
I want to
think
ask you a question, and you, Chandler, too? Like, what have we learned from other court cases and other verticals and other sectors? Like, there was a couple of Google Books cases, and what we've learned from the Anthropic and the OpenAI New York Times cases. Like, is that kind of a guide point towards where we're headed with music?
I mean, I think in some ways, yes, right? Like what we're looking at primarily is the separation of outputs and inputs. So the case law that we've seen so far has only focused on the training data that's being input. What Puya is talking about is the substantial similarity test, which for music and other art oftentimes as well, but music specifically is only going to be applied at the output stage. And
Hey,
so when we're running that test, it's like a case by case basis, right? And so the precedent that we're seeing is like running the fair use test on the training data for input. And there are definitely parallels there that can be drawn to the music industry. I think we haven't seen any cases yet on the output side of things, which is what would bring in that more case by case substantial similarity analysis, which has already kind of been thrown out of whack by the Marvin Gaye case. That has already pivoted a lot of our perspective on how we view substantial similarity, at least in a music context. So there's still a lot of questions up in the air. I mean, I think we have precedent with Google Books. We have, Barth versus Anthropic, the two cases we have up from Northern District of California this past summer that give us some information of how courts are looking at the fair use analysis. But again, this is for published written materials. We haven't had this input or output side, music composition side, come up in the courts, and it leaves a lot of opportunity to discuss, where we think that can go and how we think that precedent can then be extrapolated out.
Right. I want to, Sean, I want to pass to Michael because I'm really,
Yeah.
really interested into the situation that he sees traveling around the world. And Michael, you just mentioned a couple of case study and how do you see the AI, the use of music or any other art, if you want to touch on that, to actually help artists to to create and be compensated for, and when you're not the big, the big band that that can sue everybody that can do something wrong about it.
Well, look. In some respects, we have to remember. It's funny. When I was recently in South Africa, I was with Gallo Records, which is, I think, Africa's oldest record label, right? Or Africa's oldest homegrown record label. And from their perspective, technology writ large. Forget AI for one moment, in some respects, it's a lead in to, a resurgence. They've got songs which have never properly been played, which has never properly been distributed. They're now looking at digitalizing all of that, getting it out there, through the use of social media and all of these platforms. It allows you to reach new markets, new niches. You're seeing collaborations between big international artists and hyper local artists, that kind of localization that can now be globalized and build markets around the world. So to some extent, it's incredibly exciting. Now, of course, we have to figure out where the boundaries lie on some of these issues with respect to fair use, originality, and some of these questions in the courts. There's a number of different jurisdictions who are handling that in different ways. My understanding is countries like Japan and Singapore have perhaps taken more liberal stances in terms of how much they allow exemptions to copyright, in terms of AI use. Whereas in South Africa, an amendment to their copyright law is literally going through the courts now. It was held up to the Constitutional Court for review last year, and I believe that's where it's still languishing, waiting to be resolved. But this if you look at this is the cornerstone of this issue, right? In terms of where ultimately the courts and the parliament and lawmakers will say this is where the test will ultimately come to when dealing with issues of fair use and what constitutes fair use. But I ultimately think, if you go back to something Drew said earlier, and if you take the point that ultimately music that relies a lot on AI to be generated is currently, I think the stat you said, Drew, was 1% maybe in terms of overall downloads. If you take that and say, okay, that's where the market's going to be, and you also take the view that AI is going to disrupt other industries, right? People say that when you look at, my focus is how do we eradicate poverty, and the traditional sectors, mining, manufacturing, agriculture, that communities have traditionally, historically relied on to lift communities out of poverty. If all of those industries are going to be disrupted and they're not going to create jobs, right? They're not going to create incomes and livelihoods in the same way that they have historically. Where are the jobs? Where are the incomes going to be generated from? And this is where I think music and the live events industry, creative economy sector writ large, could actually become one of those industries that we rely on over the coming decade. The president of the World Bank, RJ Banga, recently said that over the next 10 years, we're going to have 1.2 billion people enter the job market, mostly in developing economies. He said currently we have about, based on job creation trajectories, currently we have about 400 million jobs to meet that 1.2 billion need. So where's the other 800 million jobs going to come from? And the World Bank, together with tourism, hospitality, the creative economy, he threw out this stat. He said for every dollar invested in the creative economy and tourism, you create 8 more jobs in manufacturing. And you look at stats reports from the World Economic Forum, they say people are traveling more, not just to see things, traditional tourism, but they want to experience. They love going to events. They love music. And so you could say, actually, this could be the age of music, live events industry, where it's actually taken seriously for once as a serious driver of economic development, and economies have to get behind it. Governments have to get back and say, hey, this is a serious part of our trajectory. And I think the UK has flagged this as a key part of their strategy over the coming decades. So, in that respect, from music, it could actually end up getting the attention from policymakers, lawmakers, that I know many in the industry have often bemoaned and said, okay, when we go and meet with ministers or cabinets, they just refer to us as the music guys, but without actually treating us seriously as, sport or infrastructure or mining or some of these other big drivers as well. So in that sense, it could be incredibly exciting. That's the upside. That's part of the reason why at Global Citizen we're trying to build Africa's first international touring circuit, because I think it could be incredibly exciting.
And you know what? Another thing is the appreciation for what is made by humans, right? It just gives you that, handcrafted appreciate, like looking at what has been made by us, because nobody want to go to see a concert live where AI is playing. I mean, I wouldn't. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, even the ABBA avatars, the ABBA Voyage show in London is like, which is hilarious that they call them avatars. Even they have a 10-piece acoustic live band with the avatars. So you're right.
It is a novelty, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's gonna last. Really, I mean, you can go at the Sphere in Las Vegas and look at something like that, but I don't think it will stand the, it wouldn't stand the judgment of time, honestly. And I would like to know the kids. Like, how did the kids learning music now? I mean, maybe Chandler, what do you see when a kid knows they can create music with AI pretty easily? Does it choose to play with AI, or does it still say, "Well, I'm gonna play guitar, or I'm gonna play an instrument"?
I mean, I think that's what access to these tools in all sectors is sort of reflecting now, right? Like these general studies that are beginning to come out about cognitive decline, like lack of reasoning. Like when you have the option to offload, just as humans, naturally, we're going to take the easier way out, right? It's a lot harder to get a kid to practice piano and learn sheet music and strum their guitar and get calluses on their fingers, all those processes that are physical, mental, and emotional that go into making music. And I think what Michael has really highlighted is this intangible value of music, right? I think, especially in the legal field, when we talk about damages, when we talk about valuation, we're talking about financial value, market value in a fair use context. But music is unique in these intangibles, right? The power it has to connect people and bring people together, these things that Michael's looking to capitalize on, these things that we all know and have personally experienced to some extent. That's why we're here today talking about music. And I think what we really have to look at is how are we compensating musicians, but not just in a financial context. I know that when I was 12 years old, writing songs in my bedroom and posting them online, I wasn't looking to become a millionaire. It was not financial incentive that was driving me to do that. It was a greater drive to connect and share and be heard and felt and seen. And I think we have to bring that conversation more into the legal space, because if we're looking at it and evaluating things like market based on a purely financial standpoint, we're missing out on a lot of the point.
Totally. And I think we want to live in a society that incentivizes people to be artists, not only just because it's good for the economy, but because it's good for culture and society and it's good for mental health. And I'm like fascinated, Michael, by your perspective on music and the creator economy can actually matter from a global GDP standpoint. I've like never heard that perspective before. I think it's spot on. And I think it's something that like we should be working towards, because what I don't know if it's terrifying or awesome that music could be the savior of the world economy. Typically relying on the music industry to do anything productive or right has not gone well. But I think it's like, you're right. I mean, all the stability around the industry and the stability around the creative fields, especially in the Western world. Europe has a little bit more institutional support with governments, and even Canada does. But I think developing those skill sets and to Chandler's point, like incentivizing people to pursue this for beyond just a job is something that we should absolutely work towards infrastructure to support.
My good friend Shane Shapiro, he's a music economist. You should check out some of his work. He's trying to measure just this, and what he points out to me is, currently I think the value of music to the world's GDP, it's something like 4%, right? Which sounds low, but he points out that in the last few years, that it represents a doubling from 2%, right? So yes, it's a small base, but it's growing. And partly because we're getting better at how we track it and also putting a value on some of those intangibles you mentioned, Chandler. Like he pointed out that if you took just the value of record labels, right, going back all time, the history of every record out there, the value of that, on paper at least, it's equivalent to, and he valued it as very low, relatively speaking. He said it's equivalent to the value of India's wedding industry or wedding events industry. And he said that can't be true, right? And this is because, a lot of these musicians around the world, either it's not licensed, it's not tracked, or it's not represented. So partly it's how do we document this and show to government actually this could be a big chunk, but also it's one of those areas where, and who knows, maybe we will all be watching AI generated concerts, maybe we will show for that music, but I think the human condition, we have a good sense of seeing through all of that, right? When we get all this content, we're still good at ciphering through and recognizing a good story or song when we can. And so if you count on that judgment for genuine, authentic creativity, and if we put in the policies, the investments to allow it to thrive, it could be entering a powerful new era. And that's why, I mean, he's working on a book at the moment, and he's titled it "How Music Can Save the World," which might be on the risk of hyperbole, but in some respects, it may not be far from the mark.
I mean, music has a huge mind share in culture, and it's the most popular thing in the world. But as a business, it is really small, and it's gotten bigger with the maturation of streaming. But the way that the traditional GDP or financial services industry met, the way that they measure markets, judging by that calculus, it is like really small. So it traditionally and historically hasn't been able to support a lot of jobs, and it's been incredibly disruptive. And so it's probably more bigger than we think, but I would be surprised if it was more than 4% of world GDP. That actually sounds quite high to me.
And it makes me wonder, because I've heard the term industry here, music industry, a few times, and I'm wondering, does that need to be redefined? Do we need to? Is it a small number of entities that control what this is, and does the power need to shift? I guess to back to the artists a bit more, back to the people who help the artists perform to large groups of people, and the communities that welcome them, and to Michael's point, make live performances real. Um, I don't know. Do we need to change what the music industry, quote unquote, is?
Well, I think it's
Probably.
changing. I think it's changing. I mean, with social media, the dynamic of the record label controlling the success or not success of an artist, that has been changing. Like, you can see a lot of crop. Sorry for the French, online, but you can see a lot of opportunities of people that maybe would have never done it unless they were, quote unquote, discovered by the producer, and still making it big, and now actually being in the position to control their own music and their own income. So I don't know how AI is going to help or not help with this, but I think that it has been changed since the advent of social media list.
Because the reason I asked that question is the labels, maybe not so much the labels, but maybe the like was it who owns the right, who manages the rights to the music, right? The licensors.
Yeah, I
When
mean,
you play it.
there's a lot of things that are music centric that are not counted in the music industry. So if I'm Oldsmobile, I don't know why I just picked Oldsmobile, but I'm a car company, and I do like a advertising campaign around a Ariana Grande song. That is not considered. What's paid to her master and publishing for the sync is but the media value captured in that is not considered the music industry. And there's a lot of brands and agencies out there doing that. And even some of these like creator economies that raise a lot of capital, a lot of them are based around K-pop. That's not necessarily considered the music industry, but it's all kind of flows in. So we definitely need new definitions. I mean, we need new definitions around what's major, what's indie. A lot of what you think is indie is actually owned by a major label. So Taylor Swift is technically an independent artist. She gets counted in the independent artist stats in the music industry. I don't think anyone would think or assume that Taylor Swift is an independent artist in the strictest sense. So we do need a lot of new definitions. We need a new way to categorize and codify what it is, what quote unquote music is.
I think what's interesting on the rights holder side of that, though, is if you're looking at, let's say, like the big three major labels in the US that are managing the majority of music rights, if those are the people controlling the majority of artists, right, that are not quote unquote actually independent, then those are the people who are in the rooms having conversations with AI licensing companies, right? So there's a representation issue as well, as I think licensing is sort of looked at as this panacea for a plethora of music industry issues faced by AI. And when you think about who is owning and controlling these rights going back and forth, you're not accounting for all musicians, right? Like this huge like Udio settlement that UMG just happened to have, and their licensing deal that pushed through, that's not all music being licensed, right? That's only rights that are controlled by UMG. And so I think what we have to look at is who's controlling these rights and what independent artists who are actually independent, not working with labels, who do have more opportunities than ever before, what they can do to be a part of this conversation. Otherwise, there is this sort of wiping out of rights in the sense that I can infinitely generate maybe Taylor Swift songs because I'm pulling them from UMG's catalog, but I can't infinitely generate a number of Drew songs because his Atlantic deal hasn't pulled through. There's such an infinite number, and I think it's a representation and consent issue on the licensing front as well.
Yeah, the rich getting richer and ignoring the long tail. Yeah. This is this episode will come out after, but ironically I'm spending the day at Suno tomorrow. I'm working on some stuff with them, and I keep trying to get them to tell me what's going on, when are the deals coming, and obviously they won't tell me a thing. But we all expect these deals to happen, and I think the music industry's answer to that question, Chandler, is that's why we have Merlin. Merlin's job is to advocate for and license the independent music community. And if you're an independent label or you're an independent artist, then opt into what we do and you'll be part of that whole pool. But when the history of recorded music now includes 250 million songs, when 10 years ago it was 18 million songs, I mean, it's just like, how do you manage and compensate all those people fairly? We're drowning in a sea of music. And that's not an AI. That's not because of AI. That's just because of the democratization of digital recording and distribution over the last 10 years.
I mean, I wonder if there's something to be said now for the new era of independent artists, because if you're missing out on these larger scale licensing deals, I wonder if in a sense there's incentive to not be a part of it, because then you can stay human generated, right? Like if I not signed to a major label, don't want people just make a Chandler song into Suno, right? Then I can maybe retain some of my rights holdership, and it could usher in a new era of independent artists who are not participating in these generative models and putting artists who are under record deals under a different level of scrutiny, because now all of a sudden, I'm signed, but this also means that whether or not I consented to it on the front end contractually, I am now infinitely generable, right? And so that is an interesting dichotomy shift that we're going to see as well, I think, with smaller independent artists, is whether or not they participate in the AI scheme, as it were, and how that distinguishes, the content that's coming out and that we're consuming.
So we have a few minutes left here, about 10 minutes. I want to bring Puya back in. So I guess the big question I had was, does the industry need to change? Can we look back at other significant changes in other areas of technology? Because you spend a lot of time in tech, IP, and copyright stuff. Can we look back at other areas where we might be able to see what the future might hold for AI, specifically with music?
That's a good question. I think And just looking back in terms of like sampling might be a good place to look for what the future holds for AI and music. But there hasn't sampling and just derivative works like Shepard Fairey case where he took the Andre the Giant and made it into those posters, and like the transformative use of using other material to create new material. That is, I think, the foundation for the rights, like what's going to happen with these AI cases. But I don't know any other legal area where it's all based on copyrights. I mean, trademarks aren't involved, patents aren't involved. It's just if you look at previous trademark cases, I mean copyright cases of when one artist took what was already created and created something else with it, how much transformation was there? That's where we're going to get into. But the underlying question is and I think, sorry for the fire alarm, I missed what you guys were talking about. From what I do understand is maybe you guys were talking about like bundling artist rights, and I think that comes into training data for large language models and movies and everything else. And so it's not just going to be limited to music. It's going to be all the multimedia that's going to be involved. There's going to be some bundling of rights somewhere because people are tired of their work being used to train the large language models. But on the other, before that, I think we also need to look at where the current administration is. So like the current administration tried to get rid of the director of the Copyright Office because she was more towards artist rights than she was towards the companies. And I think the current administration is leaning more towards the big companies than artists. So I think that comes into play too. We can't discount that.
Yeah, and Drew, I wanted to ask you this question: Is it possible to create something unique? I mean, if you're generating something with AI, it's based on something from somewhere, probably multiple things. To Puya's point, right? Multiple artists, multiple sounds. Can we, if AI is involved, can we ever create something new and unique?
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, Marco, you said earlier about how music is the confirmation of I learned from this piece and that piece. I mean, that's why it's called a neural network, right? I mean, they literally were built based off how a brain works. These AI models are really impressive. They're really good. And by the way, AI models aren't the only ones making shitty music. I mean, most of the music, as someone who ran A&R teams as long as I did, you know how many bad demos I sat through and bad shows?
Oh god.
Like humans make, and also I don't want to pick on, I hate to say this because I respect the career she's had, but have you spent time in a Katy Perry recording session? I mean, people come in and the producers come in and they focus group a synth patch and then they'll bring her in and sing the top line and they'll vocode it and auto tune it to death and then they'll focus group it some more. By the time the song is like printed for mixing and mastering, it's like, that's Bob Dylan in a room with a guitar? It is not. So yeah. I think like we need to think about this as a spectrum rather than a binary AI or not. AI is used a lot in the creative process now. It has been used in the creative process. Most of what you hear has been mastered with AI. Now AI is like creating plugins and samples and synths, and the line between what's AI generated, what's AI assisted is really blurry. So these models are really good. And I watch these artists who, are very hesitant to work with AI and they hate it. And the idea of a generative AI model is something that's threatening to them. And then you watch them play around with these models, especially the new Suno Studio, and you see what it can do for them. And you can see the ideas it creates. And almost every artist I've talked to who's gone through this process is converted. And that doesn't mean we need to ignore the copyright issues. It doesn't mean we don't need to work out some licensing frameworks. But as Puya said before, sampling is a good analogy here. I mean, the industry was like, we can't possibly figure this out. And sure enough, we did. We came up with a licensing framework. We came up with a way to clear it. And we came up with a way to track it. And I think the same is going to have to be true with AI. Whatever the law says, we'll come up with a way to fingerprint, track, and then figure out deal with the outputs. But these AI models are really good. They're so good. And they can create compelling music. And if a human is attached to it, human in the loop, then I think it's going to create compelling art that people are going to want.
And they're going to get better. Like, I've seen what these engineers are working on. I'm like, we're writing the patents right now. Like, the stuff that they're coming out with is like mind blowing, like especially with like movies. So I know like the movie stuff is going to be groundbreaking in the next few months, years. The music is going to get better. Everything's just going to get better. We're just like we're at the crest of the wave.
I
I think
also
this
I
brings
think
back Michael's point, though, right? About how live then is going to have to become the backbone inevitably, because I know we've all felt it, but this exhaustion of like digital content inundation, I think it was already hard enough to keep up with digital updates from just human made content. And now we have slop feeds kind of integrating into every platform, what have you, including music streaming services. And so I think this idea that things can get better, maybe in a technical sense, yes, but we're so limited in terms of human attention span and what we really connect with and are compelled by. And I wouldn't say that we're most compelled by the most technically precise things. There's oftentimes that intangible is what pulls us to music, right? It's not always, this is always a fight I would get in production studios. If it's not the perfectly mastered song that has the most success, right? It's the perfectly emotional song, it has to hit someone in the right time and right place. And there's, again, those intangibles that come up with that. And so I think you have to think about the exhaustion factor, especially when we're talking about digitizing content that we're consuming, and how live hopefully will offset that a little bit. But how, as we advance more and more, it's like, is anyone going to be listening after a certain point? Are we going to wear out consumers who are just over inundated with slop in the process of getting there?
And Chandler, I trust the fans and music fans implicitly, because like if it's not compelling and it's not emotional, it doesn't have that artistic bent to it. Like fans aren't going to listen; they're going to click out of it, and that's no one's incentivized to have that.
I would,
I mean,
I would
yeah.
also, I was just going to say, picking up on something Chandler was saying, and of course, there's the economics of it. The fact, streaming, most artists, how much do you get for each song when someone downloads it? So there's the incentives why touring is picking up as the economics incentivize that. But also, I think what you are getting at is, and there's this great book I've been reading right now called The Joy of Connection, and it's about this so-called loneliness epidemic that's plaguing society. And whether or not you believe that or not, people are crying out for connection right now, right? And so, how people, there was a question, Sean, you raised earlier about what is the music industry, but it is all of that other stuff that layers onto it. It's look at Huntsville, Alabama, which is an incredible example of how in a number of years they transformed themselves into a music city, and by investing in these spaces, investing in these venues, provided a way for music to come in, provided all the ancillary jobs, businesses that benefited from that, but also revitalized the spirit of the community as well, and gave people what many are yearning. And we see this. Businesses are saying this out loud, that people are looking for connection. So there's a way in which we need this both economically, but also, I think, socially as part of our cities and towns as well. And you're going to see more and more people wanting that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have so much to say and so much more I want to hear, but we're at the final moment. I'm going to give. I think everybody kind of said a final piece here, except Puya. Maybe a final note from you before we wrap.
Final note: I think the future is interesting. I think from a legal perspective, just keep your eye out on the court cases that are coming out. They're gonna be the foundation for what's going to happen in the future. But I do think one thing I think we need to touch on, and I don't know if you guys touched on it, is um, watermarking AI, because I think when we get into deep fakes and get into what can happen in the future, I think that's a very important aspect that needs to be considered. Is how do we identify what is generated by AI? And I think that's going to be important to do in the future, because it's going to become the lines are going to become blurry, and I think that's something we need to look into as well.
Yeah. It's funny that was a fingerprinting article was what drove this whole thing for me in the first place. Well, this was super cool. I'm really grateful we all got a chance to come together and share our thoughts and experiences here. And I mean, the future is exciting, right?
Well,
I,
if I, Sean, if I can
yeah,
have one word,
you go
it's
for it.
gonna be imperfection, and I'm gonna highlight that with Chandler and live music. It's imperfect, and that's why people want to go see it and get together. Humanity and being human means to be imperfect. That's why digital music, it's not necessarily, that perfection that is gonna attract our ears and our passion and the way we are. So, Drew
I
is
love it.
back.
And at the very least, it's going to force this discussion on IP
Yep.
because something like 50 countries don't even have these frameworks. So it will force all of us to progress. So I think there's a lot of good that will come from this, even if it's at the same time, like with all transitions, a little bit scary.
Perfect. Well, thanks everybody for this
Thank
great
you.
conversation. Everybody, stay tuned for more Music Evolves, and we'll keep creating, keep playing, keep enjoying music.
Keep
Thanks.
rocking.